You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Monster House presents.
Even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright.
It's actually quite unlike anything we've ever seen before.
A giant, hairy creature, part ape, part man.
In Loch Ness, a 24-mile-long bottomless lake in the Highlands of Scotland. It's a creature known as the Loch Ness Monster.
Monster Talk.
Welcome to Monster Talk, the science show about monsters. I'm Blake Smith.
And I'm Karen Stolzno.
Some recent werewolf-related news from Karen inspired me to return to my silver bullet research, which was in need of an update. After today's discussion, I plan to stop talking about this and turn my research into something more tangible, which we'll explain in this episode. And I think I figured out how the silver bullet got embedded in werewolf lore, and it's been a wild and moonlit run through the forest of folklore to get here.
Monster Talk.
It looks like another Monster Talk where we're catching up people on our research and projects and what we're up to.
Yeah, well, in this case, this is a really long-term ongoing project for you. So I'm really interested in hearing what you've got to say about this. So we're talking werewolves.
Yeah,
today.
People often ask me what's my favorite monster, and I even though we ask that question of our guests, I always have a hard time with it. But werewolves are my go-to. They're the ones I keep coming back to, and I have my whole life. I've always just been fascinated, whether it's the sort of the Jekyll and Hyde or Incredible Hulk sort of version, or whether it's the people deliberately seeking power through magical ritual. The transformative power. Someone becoming animal, or, there's so much metaphor and lore and folklore and history and science sort of tied up with werewolves. It's very, 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 very beloved topic.
Well, yeah, it's Matt's favorite monster as well, and it's certainly high up there on the list of one of my favorites too.
Yeah. So what got me thinking about my research again was something that happened to you. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't even know how much I can say at this point, but because it's still early stages. But so I was contacted by a producer who is working on a project. He worked with Oliver Stone for about 10 years on the JFK assassination movie. And so his current project is the Wolfman, not the original one, but the 2010 version. So this is an anniversary Blu-ray that they're putting together, and they're wanting to interview the cast, and they also wanted a werewolf expert, if there is one at all, to come on and talk about werewolf culture and folklore and history. So I just finished that interview. We'll see what comes of it, but it's supposedly going to come out later this year. But it got you and I talking about all of these things. And I mean, to me, you're the werewolf expert, certainly when it comes to werewolves and silver. And I know you've been doing research into this for some time, because I thought, this goes back to the original Wolfman, because they talk about using silver. It's the only thing that can kill a werewolf. Yep. Whether it's applied to to a blow to the head, or it's to the heart, but killing the werewolf with silver. And it seems like it's a lot more involved than that. That goes back further, and it's, I don't know, just a very tangled and twisted tale.
It really is. And I think what originally got me onto this was when we were doing the Beast of Gévaudan, which was sort of a series we covered. Historian Jay Smith was talking about, and he had not really run into the whole silver bullet stuff. It's not in the original contemporary lore from the 1700s, but it does show up in subsequent documents as being mentioned as something that people considered or tried, or were trying to use it, because Silver is very closely associated with shape changing, but what I had found was it wasn't that closely associated with wolves in particular. It was mostly associated with witches. And so if you read a lot of monster books, you'll see people say that most of our silver and werewolf lore comes from the Wolfman from 41. And basically, I've just been spending a lot of time running down whether that's true or not, or when does the silver bullet firmly become entrenched with werewolf lore. And friend of the show, Justin Mullis, sent me a link to a book called Werewolves, Bird Women, Tiger Men, and Other Human Animals by Frank Hamill. And that,
Great name.
Yeah, no, obviously this is something I needed to have in my collection anyway.
For sure.
So I appreciate it. But right in the intro, Justin points out that there's specific mention of silver bullets as being effective on shape changers. And he's absolutely right. And so I decided to see if I could get a little further down the who is it who's introducing silver bullets in wolves specifically. And I think I'm closer today than I ever have been in this whole search. And I don't, unfortunately, I don't think there's a silver bullet answer to this, but there's a strong circumstantial case, which I could put together.
I just want to interject and say, I think it's really interesting that you bring up witches, because there just seems to be a lot of overlap between the history of folklore of witches and that of werewolves, even just thinking about things like the witch trials, the witch hunts, and the werewolf trials and hunts. So it does seem like they are connected in some way. And I was also thinking about the skinwalkers.
Yes, yeah.
And that connection to witches and werewolves as well. But I don't know if there's a connection there with silver. But I don't know where to begin. Where should we start then talking about this topic?
Well, okay. So first of all, what I've been doing is collecting my sort of bibliography into a spreadsheet, which I've shared before. It's. I'll put a link in the show notes if you just want to read it, because maybe other people in the audience are interested in this and want to use this as a jumping off point.
Sure.
But I basically went back into thanks to Google scanning lots and lots of books and other sort of things, I was able to. And also using multiple languages, through translation tools. I was able to go back into a lot of different. Yeah, quite. So, I mean, you
German,
could say.
French.
We don't know, sort of like prehistory. We know that, there's shamanic traditions of people turning into animals, but we don't have like a lot of written information about that. But sort of the earliest stories we have about people changing into wolves come from mythology, and the Greeks had the story of a lichen who offends the gods and is turned into a wolf, and we get lycanthropy or lycanthropes from that story. And then if you go up into Roman times, in the Roman Empire, there's a really interesting story about a man who is traveling with a companion, and the companion changes into a wolf. So it's very much a werewolf story about someone who has the ability to do this. And then... Yeah,
you've also got me thinking when you talk about Roman mythology about Romulus and Remus.
Yes,
and wolf children, feral children, founding Rome, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that idea of a founding myth, and having these sort of heroic quasi, they're sort of human, but they're sort of beyond human founding stories. That
demigods.
Yep, exactly. So Romulus and Remus, famously are raised by a wolf, and they're
suckled by a she-wolf.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in fact, this is just local stuff. I was actually born in Rome, Georgia, which is a little city north of me now.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and
I didn't know there was a Rome there.
Yeah, there's a Rome there, and I think before World War II started, when Mussolini was in charge in Italy. And some people, this was shocking, but some people used to really like the effectiveness of fascists at getting those trains to run on time. So
at least there's that. Yeah.
Yeah, and Mussolini established Rome, Georgia, as being a sister city, and gifted the city with a statue, like a replica statue of this famous wolf suckling the two children, and it still exists in Rome. Yeah, It used to be
You're
more
Italian
prominent.
in spirit.
Oh, yeah. Well, and Kathleen, my wife, is half Italian. So
There you go.
there you go. So, well, in fact, I think, if you think about it, you get that Italian werewolf connection. And then her other side is Latvian, which is, I think that's where the Werewolf of Livonia story comes from, which is that's a really interesting story. We've talked about briefly, where the werewolf basically descends into hell to punish sinners. So it's like a superhero force for God, which is an extremely funny story, which we won't get into here, but it's very interesting.
So many variations that really highlights just how many stories are out there, and whether they're good werewolves or bad werewolves, or good wolves, bad wolves. There's just so much lore out there. It's really mind-boggling.
Well, and I think one of the things I struggle with is I am really interested in how ideas get transmitted from one place to another, one person to another,
Yes.
And you can't always know, because it's very rare that you get someone who says, I'm a writer, and so-and-so told me this story, I did a little research here, and I combined them together to make this new thing. That's not a thing people typically write down in their journals, right? So
Right.
we can kind of piece it together. But I know that, in the pulps, which were really sort of an emergent form of media in the early 20th century, they were cheaply printed, but you get stuff like Weird Tales and other sort of newsprint, pulpy magazines that publish fiction and.
Is that the same thing as like penny dreadfuls?
They're similar. It's a sort of similar quality. The pulps ultimately they sort of sit in between comic books and newsprint.
Reader's Digest.
Yeah, they're very they're entertaining, and some of them are quite influential. Maybe we should do some coverage of that, a little deeper dive when I'm more prepared for it. Yeah, that's
totally. Yeah.
But out of that world, you get like what we think of as genre fiction. So, early sci-fi, early fantasy, horror, all those things emerged there because it was a place where it was low cost, wasn't a really, risky market exactly. So people experimented, like the publishers themselves experimented with lots of different types of fiction. The editorial work was somewhat sketchy. So you'll famously get writers being extraordinarily mad because the editors would just rewrite their stories, So.
Oh boy, I've had that before. It's frustrating.
It's a different world. But
even
out
today.
of that, that's where you get the publishing of Robert E. Howard, who writes Conan, Bran McMorn, Kull the Conqueror, all these sort of heroic, two-fisted adventure things. But he also writes a lot of horror stories. He becomes friends and correspondence with H.P. Lovecraft. And he wrote a couple of werewolf stories that are pretty important, I think, because they use the power of the full moon as being an influential part of the transformation, and they use the idea that werewolves can be a curse that's passed on to someone. That's not part of folklore very much. It's something that he's adding himself, and I don't know. I'm still looking to see what other authors may have sort of explored this idea.
Yeah, I mean that sounds a little bit like the Epic of Gilgamesh story with Ishtar. I mean, you get different names, different variations, but where she falls in love with Gilgamesh, and he finds out that she's cursed. A former lover turned him into a wolf, and a little bit like the Greek story, the Akkadian story, or the King Lycaon. Little bit like that, don't you think? The idea of a divine punishment or a curse.
I actually don't know that part of the story, so this is new to me. I know Enkidu, Gilgamesh's hirsute companion, is a lot of people think that's one of the many hairy wild man type proto stories. But I know he falls in love with Ishtar or has a relationship there, but I didn't know about the wolf thing. That's really interesting. Well, I obviously need to refresh my familiarity with the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the part of the story that Karen's talking about. Ishtar asks Gilgamesh to be her lover, and he refuses, citing times when she has become bored or annoyed with previous lovers, sometimes turning them into animals, including, in one case, turning a peaceful shepherd into a wolf, which leads to the shepherd being torn to pieces by his own beloved hounds. So it's not surprising that despite what an awesome girlfriend a goddess might be capable of being, the risks are just too high for Gilgamesh's taste. But his refusal of her offer leads to her begging her father to send divine punishment onto Gilgamesh, and in this case, that's the gigantic bull of heaven.
Oh, yeah, I think there's just so many variations out there. And again, often these narratives are told just, person to person, stories you hear on Facebook or YouTube or you hear around on the internet. So who knows how much of this is accurate from the original manuscripts or inscriptions is probably a very different thing.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, too, because so I think of Gilgamesh as being an ancient story, but it was lost for a long time. So it was preserved in cuneiform clay tablets, but people couldn't read cuneiform. So you needed to have it to be rediscovered and to be translated for that story to come back into play. But that's sort of I think maybe the reason I think that of all the technologies humanity has developed, writing is the most significant and influential because it allows the preservation of ideas past the life of a person.
Agree.
I mean, it lets you...
Writing and language, absolutely, because people will say, most important invention is the wheel or fire or this or that. And absolutely, language necessitates.
And
these things necessitate language and writing.
Like written language in particular, it's look, there's a perfect example. That whole story was just gone from history. And now we can find it, and then not only do you find the story, but when it's originally rediscovered, they discovered that within that story is a story of the flood that predates the Bible, which is really interesting. And it's like it was so exciting and thrilling to Victorian culture to have these discoveries being made. So I find that really interesting, like very, very interesting. So again, ideas.
But maybe we're getting off on a tangent.
Well, we are. We'll come back
to silver.
But one of the mysteries still remaining for me was how did this silver bullet concepts get so firmly entrenched with wolf lore? Now, even in 1941, when you have the Wolfman movie, silver is the method by which they kill the werewolf, but it's not a bullet. Talbot's father beats him to death with a silver wolf cane, like a cane with a silver wolf on the end of it. And it's not until I think, even when the 43 version, there's a Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, then that's when they have the full moon resurrect the Talbot as a wolf again, but that's a little iffy. But the movies, I guess my point is the movies have a big influence on werewolf lore, and then that feeds back into fiction. But before this is what excited me about Justin Mullis's letter was, okay, here's a book from 1915 that's clearly talking about silver and werewolves and witches. But even it is not explicitly saying that they're the same thing. But I wanted to know why it was coming up in 1915.
Well, it makes you think it's got to go back further than that.
Exactly. And so I think that the culprit is actually the Golden Bough. James George Fraser wrote the Golden Bough. But now he wrote it originally. It was a 2-volume set in 1890. And then he expanded on it and does a 3-volume version in 1900. And then a 12-volume version that comes out between 1906 and 1915.
12-volume, wow.
Yeah. And so it's in that longer 12-volume version that in volume 7, there's a whole section called Balder the Beautiful, talking about Balder from the Norse gods.
It sounds like Bolden the Beautiful.
Oh, doesn't it? It does. Golly, I didn't even make that connection. But yeah, Balder the Beautiful. And in that section,
inspired by that.
Yeah, maybe. They had there's just story after story about folkloric transformation of creatures and a bunch of stuff about werewolves and witches. And again, it doesn't explicitly say that they're the same thing, but it puts them literally on the same page or within a page of each other of stories of werewolves that are almost identical to the stories of witches. So I think it would be incredibly easy for someone to read that book and draw that conclusion, even if Fraser himself never says these are the same exact phenomenon, right? And so, and it's not really clear. I mean, he's collecting the folklore, and a lot of the folklorists were just repeating the stories, not speculating on whether they were true or not. That
exactly
sort of humorous tendency to try to find the real cause of this stuff. That wasn't there. This is just a huge, massive collection of folk tales, and Fraser himself heavily references where he gets his stuff from, and I found I put some links to previous material that was being used by him that's coming out of Celtic folklore. So there's a lot of this stuff going on, and I think the connector there is Fraser. I think Fraser is clearly putting it right there on the page that you have werewolves in shape changing, and you have witches in shape changing. And what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Grab that silver, and have some fun. I think that's what's really going on.
Well, I wonder, have you dived into any Montague Summers to see if he makes mention of any of this?
Okay, so his book comes out in 1933, and it is an astonishing collection of folklore and legend and thoughts. It's really a comprehensive book. It's if you're going to study werewolves, you have to have it. And that's the Werewolf in Lore and Legend. But he annoys me so much. I can't talk about him without mentioning that he constantly assumes we've all had a classical British education. So we speak Greek and we speak Latin, and we don't need a translation to explain. So he'll just cut to...
And we wear a wig.
Yeah, yes, and we apparently like young men a bit more than we ought to. Yeah, Summers is a problematic dude to be blunt. He is
for sure.
He is. Yeah, but
he so much. I thought
did.
Maybe there's
his books on vampires, his books on werewolf, absolutely core material. He did a tremendous job of collecting all that material into one volume. So I'd like to get, and I still haven't found one. There's some similar stuff, but not quite. I'd like an annotated version that actually bothers to translate all that stuff. And if nobody ever gets to it, whenever the copyright expires, maybe I'll get to it, because I would really like that. It would be really nice.
Fantastic idea, but that would be a hell of a lot of work.
It would be a ton of work, but it would be really useful. So I
agree.
Yeah. Okay. Well, enough of that. But that's a funny year, 1933. You get his book, and you also get The Werewolf of Paris comes out the same year, and that book explicitly talks about silver bullets and getting them blessed. And that, again, is coming straight out of the folklore and is mentioned by Fraser. But that's not how they kill the werewolf there either. So
already established then at that point by 1933 that it's generally accepted that. Yeah,
it does appear to be. So somewhere
between.
Right. You don't see it in the folklore in the 1800s. But by the 1900s, it's starting to be backfilled, which is another problem. If you get modern retellings of the folklore, they will frequently throw in stuff that's anachronistic, right? Like that's what happens with Gévaudan. It's not until the 1800s people start inserting the silver bullet into the story, and it's not until the 20th century that they actually literally make the claim that a silver bullet was used to kill the wolf.
Right.
That was one of my big questions, and I've come down pretty hard that was John Keel's work. That John Keel in 1970. It's not even supposed to be a well-researched part of the book. He just throws out there that in the case of Gévaudan, a blessed silver bullet was used by Chastel to kill the wolf. It's just out of his butt. I don't know. It's like it's not.
Yeah.
So
yeah. It just shows them the many layers, like an onion, really peeling back those layers to get to the truth of this story. But it does seem like it is a relatively modern notion.
It does. And I think one of the problems I've got as a researcher is, I've talked about this a few times on the show, but this is not useful. I mean, to be blunt, I can say these things. I can put stuff in the show notes, but that's not really useful for researchers. Researchers want something published. So I think what I've decided is...
But they can reference it. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think I'm going to take all my findings and put them into a monograph.
I think that's a wonderful idea.
I had sort of toyed with that idea before, but I've realized that now that I've actually done some publishing myself with the KDP, the Kindle
Joe's
platform.
Book.
Yeah, it was Joe Nichols' book. The barrier to entry is very low. And it also means that I can do something pretty cool, which is I've got the spreadsheet, which somebody can go look at now, but it'd be much better, I think, to put this into a format where it's more like each page or each section is an entry from the table, and then it's got links to it. So if you want to go back to the source material, you can click the link and go straight to the web page from the ebook.
Very cool.
That would be a better approach. And so it would allow a lot of hopping around within the text to go to references. And I really like that idea. So when you're researching something, it's really a good, useful tool. So I think I'm going to try to put that together, and I don't think it'll be very long, but well-formatted monograph. I think that will be the next thing to come out of Monster House Publishing.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And this is something that a lot of people have talked about, but I think you and I go into a lot more detail with a lot of these stories, doing research, and I think to compile all of that and to make it accessible would be really great. But a big task again, another mammoth task when you can get around to it.
Yeah, I mean, the good news is the core work is done, so turning that into something that's a little bit more narratively structured with chapters, and I want people to get value. So I mean, what I have now would be a 99-cent book, but if I put it all together, I think it could be $2 or $3 worth of work. I think I don't know. I have to look at the pricing, but I for example, I mean, this core historical research into these references, that's useful for a lot of people, I think, if they're interested in this topic. But also, I think we've just uncovered a lot of little tidbits that would be worth having published. The whole thing about when did silver bullets enter the Gévaudan legend? Well, that could be a chapter. Like I could make that a chapter, and then when did the moon become an influential part of werewolf folklore and stories?
Pentagrams.
Pentagrams. Yes, all these things. Like who introduced them? Where did they first show up? That's really useful material, I think, for people who have this sort of mindset. So I don't know why I'm so interested in this stuff, but I am, and I'm glad that we have an audience that also cares. So thanks.
We have a fantastic audience, and I guess I've got one final question about this. So you have this association of silver with werewolves. Are they associated with any other materials, or maybe gemstones or anything like that, maybe used as amulets to protect people against werewolves or to kill them or anything else?
So we get to use one of my favorite words, apotropaic magic, like the...
Excuse me? Bless you.
So, all those little necklaces people wear to ward off the evil eye, that kind of thing. I don't remember much of that. Herbs seem to be the thing. Obviously, wolfsbane comes up a lot. That's worth investigating. That would be how do you make a werewolf is one thing I thought would be a useful chapter, because there's so much conflicting lore over that. And how do you dispatch a werewolf would be another one. And but a third option would be, how do you just keep them at bay? I think that's
just protect yourself against them, or a talisman if you want to attract them for some reason. A sexy werewolf.
Exactly. But boy, howdy, is there a lot of that going around. Oh, my God.
There really is, yeah. I don't know if that stems from the whole vampire thing, the sexy vampire angle.
Laurel K. Hamilton writes a series, Anita Blake, Vampire Hunter. And... boy, it is full of sexy vampires and werewolves and all kinds of. I liked it. Originally, it started out as a more like a racier version of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and then it just got into explicitly. It's werewolf and vampire porn from a lady's perspective. So
bizarre, but so stronger than Harlequin.
Oh yeah, quite a bit. So,
but there's a 99-cent book.
If you look at, we've talked about this before with Bigfoot. There is a ton of Bigfoot porn and werewolf porn and vampire porn. If there's a monster, there is Nessie porn. There's if there's a monster, there's people writing about sleeping with it. So yeah, that's a real thing.
We need to cover that, I think, in a show as well, because I'm going to have to admit I've never read anything like that. But there is a lot of it out there, and it seems to be on the increase too. I remember first hearing about this maybe 10, 15 years ago, but it's really exploded.
I think there was a period when people got them ironically. But I think that period may have passed. I mean, some of these things, I mean, are still. You've got people who write porn about dinosaurs and people, it's pterodactyls kidnapping women, and
if you can think of it, you can imagine it, you can.
Yeah, pretty much.
Be a thing.
So
you're right about it.
I don't know. That might actually be a really interesting sort of thing to dive into, and I don't know what sort of numbers we can find, but it would be interesting to know. I don't know if Amazon shares this, but I'd like to know, like, how well did these things actually sell? I know I
think they sell pretty well because I recently uploaded my book on the story of Abraham Lincoln and ghost stories surrounding him and the ghost train. And the funny thing is, it was a category. One of the categories was historical short fiction. And when I went and looked at other books in that genre, there were a lot of short stories that were kind of historical romances and stuff along the lines of what we're talking about too. So I think it's weirdly popular. Maybe it's not so weird, but it's really a popular genre.
Mr. Lincoln, what a big hat you have. Cross everything over with everything.
Yeah.
Well, they've already had Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, so why not Abraham Lincoln Werewolf Lover? Yep.
You're going to be the one to write that.
Oh, yeah, I'm all over that. Well, so when can we expect to hear more about your DVD project? Or do you know, or is it all up in the air? So.
Well, yeah, the interview is done, and they seem to be happy with it, so I'll let the gang know as soon as I know. But,
okay, cool. Yeah.
I was hoping that you could get involved as well. I certainly name dropped you, and because you are a wealth of lore and folklore and information about werewolves, you really know your stuff.
I've read almost 3 books and seen nearly 5 movies. No.
Almost. But I am really excited about the idea of you putting together a book on werewolves and compiling all of this research, and there's just so much more out there. Yeah, maybe I should beg to get involved too. Yeah,
I think this would be a fun one. And you know what? If it's successful, maybe we can do more Monster Talk series books. That would be really cool.
Yeah, that is goals for sure.
For sure. Yep. Well, again, in case you haven't caught on, we're obsessed with monsters here at Monster Talk. So we hope you continue to be as well. So thank you for listening to this. This is the latest and greatest of what we're doing, and we will be exploding into your world with more monsters next week.
We will.
Monster Talk.
You've been listening to Monster Talk, the science show about monsters. I'm Blake Smith.
And I'm Karen Stolzno.
You just heard a discussion of some upcoming werewolf projects Karen and I are working on. Check the show notes for links to our previous coverage of this topic, and stay tuned for what I hope will be a useful project for fellow werewolf aficionados. This has been the extended commercial-free version of the show, exclusive for Patreons. Here's a little bonus tidbit for you that'll show up in the monograph if I succeed in that project. Wolfsbane shows up in so many werewolf movies as a kind of magic herb, similar to how fresh garlic's supposed to ward off vampires. But in nature, wolfsbane does not deter wolves, so why did it get this name? According to my reading, the ancient Greeks used this highly poisonous plant as a coating on meat, which was used to bait wolves. The wolves would eat the bait, and then they would die, hence the name wolfsbane. But in Europe, the name came to be associated with a folkloric tradition that the plant could ward off wolves or even werewolves. It was even said to have been used as a kind of werewolf cure, but do not even think about trying that. This plant will kill you. It is extremely toxic, very pretty, but very deadly. Thanks for your kind patronage and extraordinary generosity. Karen and I deeply appreciate your support and comments. Monster Talk theme music is by Pete Stealing Monkeys. Thank you, as always, for taking the time to make us a part of your listening life.
This has been a Monster House presentation.
Werewolf.
Werewolf?
There. What? Werewolf. There. Castle.
Why are you talking that way?
I thought you wanted to.
No, I don't want to.
Suit yourself. I'm easy.